Hi guys, so we're here at St. Paul outside the walls. The basilica that was built in honor of St. Paul. He's buried um, under the altar here where his tomb was. Now remember, this site on the Ostian Way is one of the most well attested ancient sites for the tomb of St. Paul. Back in the 2nd century, we have the description by the presbyter Caius, who tells us that the memorial of St. Paul is here on the Ostian Way. There was an original basilica built by Constantine here, and then this is called the Theodosian Basilica, built by under Emperor Theodosius in the late 380s and dedicated in 390. But I would draw your attention across the way, literally right here across the road are the banks of the Tiber River. And the Tiber River has such a deep meaning for the Romans, right? It was there in all of their ancient myths. You look at the myth of Aeneas coming from the city of Troy, escaping Troy and coming to Rome. Aeneas comes to this land on the Tiber, and in a deep sleep, the river god Tiber appears to him and says that he'll be the father of a great nation that will grow up right here on the banks of the Tiber. Then you think of Romulus and Remus, right? The famous twins who were cast into the Tiber River to die because the king was afraid that they would take his throne. So these twins, Romulus and Remus, are cast in the river, but it's the river that actually saves them and brings them safely to the bank, and then the she-wolf suckles them and brings them up. And eventually Romulus does found the city of Rome on the Palatine Hill. So the river Tiber has these great mythical foundation stories. But the great foundation story is there for the Christians as well. Prudentius was a Spanish Christian poet who visited Rome in sometime between the year 400 and 405. And he wrote of both this place and of St. Peter's Basilica. And he had a great spiritual imagination and meditated upon the Tiber River and this basilica and St. Peter's, kind of refounding the story of Rome. And the true story of Rome is the Christian one. You know, think about it. Christian Rome has been Christian longer than Rome was pagan, almost by over 1,000 years. And Christianity continues to thrive here on the banks of the Tiber. But instead of Romulus and Remus, it's St. Peter and St. Paul that spilled their blood on the southeast side of Rome here on the Tiber, facing west. And then St. Peter's Basilica on the north side of Rome, and on the other side of the Tiber, facing east. So it's almost like these two basilicas build this border, this sacred border around Rome that protects her and blesses her throughout the ages. So Steve, if you could, read the poem from Prudentius that he had wrote.
Friend, why do joyous people more than usual now congregate? All over Rome they run to celebrate for apostolic triumph. Two, whose feast day here is annual, famously died, St. Peter and St. Paul. It was the same day, 1 full year apart. The same day saw them both receive the laurel by a noble death. Washed by the nearby river, well they know, the Tiber's marshy lees, that they were hallowed by 2 victories, for they saw both the cross and the sword, by which a rain of sacred blood fell twice to soak the grass that felt its flood. So you'll notice that we've talked about before in a previous episode about the memory of the church, the early church, and how it was always in their memory that Peter and Paul died here, and that the popes, the successors of St. Peter, were not just the successors of St. Peter only, but the successors of this kind of unity of Peter and Paul. Because there was a perceived tension in the 1st century between the two, where, it says, even Paul even says, I opposed Peter to his face, right? So there was this kind of idea that Peter was more of a friend of the circumcision and Paul was more of a friend of the uncircumcision, and between those two there was a tension. But the fact that they both went to their deaths together in the same common ministry and poured forth their blood and their doctrine on this city in Rome is what gave Rome its position in the church. It's not just that, it was the capital of the empire. It's not just that. It's that this is where the church remembered that her unity began And that's why they would refer to Rome as that ancient church. Because you would think, oh, Jerusalem, right? But no, the mother of Christendom is really here in Rome. Because you remember that by the time that they're in the persecution, and by the time that both of them were killed, you're already going to see a few years later the Jerusalem church completely destroyed with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So Jerusalem is waning at the very time that Saints Peter and Paul give their life here in Rome. And you'll see that the memory of this is etched in the stones. You can see here, you have Peter. Over here you have Paul, and even up here, flanking Christ in the mosaic, Peter, Paul, and inside it's everywhere. It's palpable. You see Peter and Paul on the doors here. You can see Peter and Paul, the story of their death. So you see that emphasis on both apostles for that reason. It's not enough that we would say that the Church of Rome is the kind of the successor of St. Peter's ministry. More so, it's the successor of Peter and Paul, where the unity of the church is born.
Well, it's good speaking with you. We're going to go in and see St. Paul and pray at his tomb.